It was a splendid day and the sun was shining high in the sky, and somewhere in the eastern military district. There was a large luxurious building, standing out among the rest for its beauty. Inside the building, there was a training room, in which stood a white-haired woman. She was surrounded by giant but shiny steel balls. She was none other than Snowy. She remained silent for several seconds, and then, little by little, she began to raise her head and her attention focused on the balls. Her eyes were full of determination. She extended her hands, began to stare intently at the balls, and used her power, causing her body to emit a powerful and intense red energy. She gave the order for the metal balls to rise. In a matter of seconds, a golden energy appeared around the metal balls. She concentrated her power, making the metal balls slowly begin to float in the air as if they were balloons. She started observing the metal balls, placed her hands in front of her face, and with a serious expression decided to test her new technique. In the blink of an eye, the balls began exploding one after another, creating small explosions. She turned her back on them and started to walk away. Then she closed her eyes and, since she was somewhat exhausted from having used so much energy, she wiped her chin with her hand. I'm not going to lie, but she has a good cake. Anyway, while she was walking away, the phone in the back pocket of her pants started ringing. Her mind filled with curiosity, she took the phone out of her pocket and turned it on to check if a new message had arrived. It was a message from our boy. He revealed to Snowy that he was fine but asked her not to reply to the message or think too much about it either. Upon seeing that this message was from Lu Sheng, she put her hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears and joy. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng was okay and hadn't died. She remained paralyzed looking at the message, and a while later, Qin appeared and entered the training room. With a cheerful gaze, he began to smile and wave at her, asking if she had received the message. Snowy placed the phone on her chest, and her eyes filled with tears. Even though she was very happy to know that our boy was okay, she couldn't help but cry. Qin approached her and upon seeing this, his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. She realized that she had also received a message from Lu Sheng, reminding her that he had said our boy would have no problems and would return safe and sound. She pressed the phone against her chest, closed her eyes, and couldn't help but smile and feel relieved. Saying that she wasn't worried would be a license after all, he had disappeared off the face of the earth for a long time. Now that there was finally news about him and the heavy stone in her heart had finally fallen, she couldn't help but wonder when Lu Sheng was going to return. Her phone rang again, she turned it on and opened Qin's chat message, Lu Sheng's sister. She wrote to Snowy revealing that she had news about her brother, then sent a stuffed animal emoji. Snowy, who was very happy, replied that she had also received messages from Lu Sheng and then sent a happy cat emoji. In the Ninghai Sea, there was a high-ranking military ship sailing at full speed. On board was the Eastern Marshal, who had his hand resting on the railing and was observing the beautiful sea. While he was distracted, lost in thought, a soldier appeared behind him, gave a military salute and caught his attention. Upon hearing his voice, the Eastern Marshal came out of his trance and with a calm expression began to observe the soldier, who revealed that there was an urgent report from headquarters. General Lu Sheng had sent news saying that he was fine but would need a few more days to return. Upon hearing this, his eyes spread with joy and happiness. He turned towards the soldier and couldn't help but smile. Now that there was news of Lu Sheng, he decided it was time for everyone to retreat and gave the order to the soldier to inform everyone to return to the military district. He put his hand behind his back, clenched his fist, began gazing at the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. The army had been waiting for this day for more than 200 years, and of course they didn't mind waiting a little longer. Besides, it wouldn't be long before the god of the future army finally returned. From that day on, half a month passed, and after an arduous journey, the research ship finally successfully returned from Antarctica to Lion Country. The ship was so luxurious that it even had a helipad. Not far from the area, there was a beautiful island, full of trees and mountains, called Golden Ring Island. Located on the border between the countries Lion and Eagle, it was an island without satellite location. A few hours later, the ship arrived at the port, and using some stairs, the workers started to unload Professor Nepson's luggage and belongings. Among the passengers were two men. The man wearing a cap and holding onto his backpack strap with one hand extended his hand toward his friend and with a smile mentioned that after sailing for several months, the expedition had finally ended. The other man put his hands behind his head, closed his eyes, and casually replied that the expedition had been boring. He was honest and mentioned that this type of escort mission was worse than going to fight with the Dark Star and the Black Demon Society. The man turned his head to one side, and his eyes widened with admiration. With a smile, he asked if he also thought the same way as they did. The man wearing a cap turned towards them and began observing in silence. The purple-haired man who was smoking a cigarette started descending the stairs, explaining that anguish was also part of training. The two men turned around, began watching him, and their minds filled with confusion. They explained that the level of master was high and distant, and they were still very far from reaching it. The man opened his eyes and his gaze filled with curiosity as something caught his attention. In front of them was the capsule where Lu Shang's frozen body was. Professor Nepson was in front, giving orders, asking the workers to hurry up and make sure not to damage it. Several men were helping to take the capsule off the ship. The man approached and began observing Lu Shang in silence. The attention of the three focused on Nepson, with a gaze full of disdain. The man wearing a cap said that Nepson was a fool since he treated a simple corpse like a treasure. With an angry expression, his friend mentioned that he had heard Nepson wanted to revive the corpse. For him, this was ridiculous since there was no way to bring the dead back to life. The man with purple hair, who was smoking a cigarette, simply began to think in silence. His gaze fixed on Lu Shang and his eyes widened with curiosity. He was honest in saying that his mind was full of questions. He started walking towards the capsule and with a calm expression gave the workers the order to wait a moment. One of them turned around and greeted the man respectfully, calling him Lord of the 10th Seal. Nepson went on alert, stood in front of the capsule, extended his hands and with a furious expression asked Elton what he was doing, mentioning that this corpse was his precious experimentation material. Elton kept walking towards him and then, with a serene look, used his power and asked Nepson to step aside. Causing Nepson's body to start floating, the mind of the poor professor filled with fear. The professor's body shot backward and crashed into two workers, their eyes widened with concern as they asked if he was okay. Nepson stood up and was furious. According to him, Elton was a barbarian, thief, and vandal. Elton approached the capsule and his attention fixed on Lu Shang, explaining that he was just going to take a look. Our boy made no movement so as not to raise suspicion. Elton extended his hand toward Lu Shang and, due to his great curiosity, used his power, causing his hand to start emitting a green glow. He decided it was time to investigate this corpse a little. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, felt Elton's energy and couldn't help but go on alert since if this guy touched his body, the whole plan would be ruined. The green energy appeared in Elton's hand and little by little he began to bring it closer to the capsule where our boy's body was. At first, Lu Shang did nothing, thinking about what to do now, but then he clenched his fist and began to release orange energy. If he didn't attack immediately, something bad could happen. Just before Elton could touch Lu Shang, by chance, his phone started ringing. Elton stopped abruptly and his eyes widened in surprise. He took out his mobile phone, turned his back on Lu Shang, and began to walk away. He decided to forget about this matter since he had no time to waste arguing over a corpse. He had other more important matters to attend to. Our boy little by little began to open his eyes and his gaze fixed on Elton. He had barely been saved. If that level 8 master had come to inspect directly, Lu Shang was not sure if he would have been able to keep pretending, much less because there were several details that would not withstand a thorough examination. Nepson was hypnotized and brainwashed. That could be ignored, but not everyone was foolish. Nepson, who was somewhat happy, began approaching our boy and used his hand to call all the workers so they could continue moving the capsule. Lu Shang closed his eyes again. He felt relieved that Elton had left as otherwise. He would have had no choice but to kill everyone and forcibly escape, but luckily, at the last moment, that guy had been called away by some important matter. Nepsun's eyes were shining with hatred. He decided to make sure to report Nepsun to the Master of Divine Seals. He gave the order to his men to move quickly and transport the corpse to the laboratory. A few minutes later, they took Lu Shang's body to the laboratory and connected it to a special machine. Nepsun, who had his arms behind his back, stood silently contemplating but then something happened, and Nepsun's expression changed. His eyes widened in surprise. He was in shock and couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Little by little, the level of liquid inside the capsule began to decrease. Nepsun was speechless as the mutant metallurgy liquid had been absorbed by Lu Shang's body. He was happy to see that his plan was working, believing that divine will was awakening little by little. If enough energy was provided, soon the god would fully resurrect. He approached the microphone and with an excited smile gave his men the order to immediately exchange all his research resource quotas for this month for high-level metallurgy liquid and send it to the laboratory. He also decided to request next month's resource quota in advance so he could exchange it for more metallurgy liquid. A large amount of brain fluid from mutant beasts and cellular tissue fluid was also needed. Following Nepsun's order, several men brought several boxes full of containers with mutant metallurgy liquid. The man in front gave the order to his companion to hurry up since Professor Nepsun had ordered a large quantity of metallurgy liquid to be delivered. Nepsun injected all the metallurgy liquid into Lu Shang's capsule and now the floor was covered with empty containers. Lu Shang, who had his eyes closed, began absorbing all the liquid again. Nepsun's eyes filled with excitement. He wanted the corpse to absorb as much as it could because the more it absorbed, the faster they would be able to awaken the god. Our boy did not move, but deep down he was very happy. This was indeed with the external wounds freshly healed and the 22 immortal cells of the indestructible stellar body. His entire body was in a state of extreme need, and this mutant marrow liquid had arrived just in time. A few weeks later, our boy slowly began to absorb more marrow liquid, causing bubbles to appear inside the capsule. A smile spread across his face as the 23rd immortal cell had already begun to emerge. In these 2 weeks, he had absorbed at least an amount of marrow liquid equivalent to 8 million merits. If the cultivation tank became slightly empty, Nepsun would immediately refill it. Nepsun stood in front of the capsule, and the room was filled with empty containers of marrow liquid. Lu Shang realized that this professor's resources were absurdly abundant. After this, he was going to obtain dozens of additional immortal cells. Huanin's base was really lined with money, and he had to take full advantage of it. He opened his eyes and began imagining himself sitting in an armchair, wearing sunglasses and smoking a cigar, and behind him were some men prostrated before him. He had abundant resources for training, automatic replenishment if something was missing, and a protected training environment as if it were a sanctuary. For him, this was the best place in the world to train. Lu Shang closed his eyes and couldn't help but smile. He had just perceived something. Huanin's base at most had a level 9 martial arts master in the initial stage. With 22 immortal cells, Lu Shang could defeat Zhao Ji as if he were a dog, and now there was nothing to fear. He decided that now it was time to begin a true training retreat. 1 year later, in the meeting room of the base on Golden Ring Island, the people with the highest rank in the associations gathered and sat at a table. A hologram of a superior was activated. There was a man wearing a black suit with his hands resting on his knee. The white-haired woman wearing glasses crossed her arms and legs, and with a serious expression mentioned that this meeting would focus mainly on 2 topics. This year's World Martial Arts Masters Tournament in news about the new energy crystal deposit. She began to observe the others and explained that it was estimated that if they sent the 20 strongest lords of the seal, they would be able to obtain a much higher quota than in previous years. And this was because the Society of Black Magic had lost half its strength last year in the country of the dragon. It was possible that they might withdraw from the competition, so their share could only increase. The man who wore glasses and had a beard began to stare at the woman and asked if the information was reliable and whom the Society of Black Magic had faced. The woman remained silent for several seconds. With a sincere gaze, she started showing one finger and revealed that according to reports, it had been a martial arts master who had recently ascended in the country of the dragon. Upon hearing this, everyone's expression changed, their eyes widened in surprise, causing their jaws to drop in shock. They could not believe that there was a new martial arts master in the country of the dragon. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,